Welcome to City Life. I'm Beverly Thompson. A rising violent crime rate, community and police tensions, officer morale and recruitment challenges. All of these issues currently face the Durham Police Department. Now that Durham has a new police chief, how do we as a community move forward with improving our police-community relations, and what can residents do to help? Joining me to talk about her first 60 days as Durham's new police chief and her plans for the future is Chief Cerelyn Davis. Welcome to our show, Chief, and thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Chief, before we get started, I'm curious, as many of our viewers probably are too, why in the world did you decide to leave Atlanta to join us here in Durham? We're glad to have you, glad you're here, but what made you make that choice?
Well, as most of you know, I came to the end of a 30-year career in the city of Atlanta. You know, Atlanta was where my heart was for so many years. I lived there from the time that my father retired from the military, and I was born here in North Carolina too, in case our viewers didn't know. And at the end of my career, my husband and I had talked on many different occasions about what would be next for me. And he knew that I had mentors in the police department who had pushed me along to become a police chief, and some folks wanted me to stay in Atlanta, and maybe that would have happened for me one day there. But at the time, after 30 years, I really felt that it was time for me to move on and take other challenges. We had absolutely nothing holding us back. I did my research, and I realized that Durham was a growing and very progressive city. It reminded me a lot of Atlanta, when Atlanta began to mushroom and grow, and this city just was very attractive just through the research.
So I know you've been here now for a couple of months, and I guess I want to know more about your assessment of the Durham Police Department. In your opinion, what is working well at the department?
Well, one thing I can say for sure is that even before coming to Durham, you know, I did my research about the department. You know, everybody wants to go to a good or progressive department. And the Durham Police Department has accomplished much. They are a gold standard accredited agency, and that's very attractive to any law enforcement leader. That means that they have made sure that they have met certain standards and guidelines that across the country and the world that demonstrate that they are looking to be a class act in the area of law enforcement. So in doing my research, I found out that what's good about the department is you have some very dedicated individuals who are dedicated to the profession and dedicated to the community as well. And that's admirable, especially in our line of work.
So on the other side, what did you find that needs changing, or have you had enough time to even make an assessment like that?
Well, and I have. Some things were very apparent to me, shortages, possible opportunities for reallocating manpower, specialized units to deal with very specific types of situations and cases. Also, I think the community policing aspect of the police department could probably be more robust. They do have a community policing element, but I do believe there's opportunities for us to have a much more broader reach. And I believe just looking at the various opportunities that give us chances to reach our community, whether it's through victim witness, whether it is through a more robust police athletic league to reach our young people, even some populations such as our seniors. How can we reach seniors, individuals that sometimes, you know, they're there, but the only time we have encounters with them is if they've been victim of some type of crime, some type of theft.
It seems pretty broad. I mean, have you set a timeline to make any changes, or are you giving yourself just a little bit more time to do that?
Well, and I'm observing some things are low-hanging fruit, you know, that don't require, you know, budget allocations or anything of that nature. Some staffing issues have been addressed just by moving individuals around a little bit, changing hours and even leadership. So in the short term, we're working with what we have to make various adjustments and prioritizing. So in my mind, crime reduction is primary right now. And in order for us to reduce crime, we do have to put the cops on the dots, if you will. And even though we don't have the numbers of officers that we would like to have right now, we're stretching ourselves just a little bit so that we can make sure that we're covering those communities that so desperately need that right now.
Chief, I guess coming into a new organization, perhaps the biggest thing is learning the culture of the organization. First of all, is it really that important from a police chief perspective? I mean, you think about the paramilitary approach, but then there are other things that come into play in that. And what's your assessment of our police department's culture?
Well, you know, the culture has a lot to do with the history of the department, traditions as well. And sometimes the culture can remain in one space, even though times have changed and there are more contemporary ways of viewing things and addressing issues. And in the last, I would say 10 years, law enforcement professions have had to change their culture in the way they engage. Even though crime fighting is our responsibility, we have to move out of that comfort space and start training in other ways so that we can be more impactful. Because as law enforcement, as the communities change, law enforcement has to change along with it. As generations have changed, the individuals that find themselves in a life of crime, they're different type of criminal. This is a different generation. And so is this generation of officers. So you have to take that under consideration and not think in terms of this is the way we've done it. So cultures have to change in order to be effective.
How do you meet that resistance that you know is there? I mean, not just in the police department, but in any department or any organization. Change is so hard.
It is. It's very difficult. And one thing that has been effective for me as a leader is in the new generation of officers, just like in the new generation of students, they always ask why. And a lot of times we don't want to have to tell you why, but this generation is sharp, they're intuitive to things, and they want to understand why we're making a shift. And sometimes when they understand it, they're more apt to go along with it, especially if they know it's going to make them a better department or make their work easier for them. So changing the culture means to have the various officers from the boots on the ground to the top of the command to be marching to the same beat. And everyone must march to the same beat. Messages must be consistent. And that's how you change a culture.
So essential right now, given our current climate. But before I get to that, something really big for Durham right now, it's been under discussion a long time, is police-community relations. In fact, I think it's probably big across the nation.
Yes, it is.
Especially given what's going on in Louisiana and Minnesota and Texas. I mean, what can we say about that? I mean, it just really points to the fact that we need to really put a sharper focus on it. What is your definition of police-community relations or community policing, let's say?
Community policing years ago was really about officers, you know, getting out of their cars and having more one-on-one contact with the community members. And then we became an industry of technology, and officers were in their cars more, on computers inside of their cars, and communicating in so many ways with the digital age and, you know, big data age. So we found that moving our officers away from the community created a gap. It created a lack of understanding of the communities in which our officers serve. And then when you think in terms of generations of officers, one generation after the next, policing is no different than any other industry. As individuals leave, they pass on whatever the traditions were of those individuals that came before, that are coming after them. So I say that community policing is beyond just in someone's face and getting to know their name it's really understanding who they are and where they came from, their social conditions, and why they may react the way they do, you know, to police. It depends on what community that you're policing. If it's a Hispanic community, or if it's an African American community, or even a Jewish or Indian community. It's important for officers to understand the individuals that are members of that particular community. What makes them afraid? You know, in some Hispanic communities, some of our immigrant populations come from environments where the police were terrorists. And some of that same type of mentality might follow them into communities here in the United States. But if you don't know that, you don't understand why there's this level of fear or lack of communication, or why people go inside the house when they see police officers come. So education, to me, is critical. And I'm not talking about just educating folks on history, educating on the various dynamics in different types of social settings in different communities. And I think that helps to deal with implicit bias.
I was going to ask you about that.
It helps deal with implicit bias. And you have to realize too that a lot of our officers, some of them come from places where they've never worked around anybody that doesn't look like them.
It's different.
Whether they're African American or Caucasian. You still have those same types of, you know, fears about how do I communicate to this particular population effectively.
But you're not saying that only black people can police black areas, or white people can police white communities. It's more of an understanding
It's more of an understanding and giving officers the tools in order to be more effective, whether it's verbal judo, emotional intelligence, you know, the various types of classes. And when I said implicit bias, the types of courses that help them to understand that when they walk out of the room, I do have an implicit bias. We all have some type of implicit bias. But until you recognize that there may be some type of bias that lies within, you're not going to be able to correct it or be cognizant of it because you've never acknowledged it.
Well, I guess my next question would be, of course, one would think that police community relations would be enhanced by having enough police officers to actually be in the community. And I know that as part of the budget, we recently approved 20 additional police officers, as well as a new program for take-home cars.
Yes.
How will these additional resources help with the community strategy, the robust community policing strategy?
Well, I'm excited and really coming in as a new chief, feel really good that even though I missed the budget planning cycle, I was able to walk into an environment where the administration and our elected officials thought it was important that the police department be staffed with an additional 20 officers. And that's a start for us. So as we look at bringing those officers on, we're really taking a close look to see where should those officers be. So we're starting to analyze our calls for service, not just to make sure that we have 70 officers in every district. Every district may not need 70 officers. As the city continues to grow and the population blossoms in so many different areas, calls for service change. There are increases in different geographical locations in the city. And as a police chief, you have to stay on top of where your resources are going to be allocated. So just because there are 2 vacancies over in District 2, that doesn't necessarily mean that we'll be sending 2 additional officers to District 2. Right now, we're looking at who is getting most of the work and where the help is needed. So we'll be reallocating manpower. That is really going to help us quite a bit. And the other consideration was to have officers with take-home cars. Officers were really excited about that. We have lost officers to go to other agencies because they have been provided with, you know, the dangling carrot
of course.
of yes, you get a take-home car, and that means a lot to some of these officers. So I think that's going to help us with our retention. And I do believe that even with the retention, it may encourage some of our officers to move back in the city.
Oh,
it's a force
that would be good.
multiplier for us. Even though we have officers that are patrolling every day, you have other officers that are off, but while they're off, they're providing additional visibility in the city.
That's always important.
It is, it is.
So looking at the big picture then, do we, even with the 20 officers, have enough police officers in Durham?
That's
I
a
know
trick
that's a loaded question.
Well, you're always fighting attrition. So with the additional 20 officers, that does allow us to fill in some gaps and some areas where we really needed to address anyway. To tell you the truth, we could always use additional officers, especially in a growing city. So for now, what we're going to do is use those officers where we need them the most. And we're going to be working really close with the administration about how do we work with our attrition issue. We have to plug the hole in the bucket. So even if we get 20 and we lose 30, we're down 10.
Yeah.
So we have to continuously look at ways that we can make our department attractive, competitive, and encourage our officers to stay in the city of Durham.
Okay, flip side, let's talk about bringing those officers in for training. I know that is a huge challenge just to recruit new officers.
Yes.
And I know we just got the results of our ICP staffing study.
Yes.
And I know you're analyzing those results. And what are they telling us? And how are we going to go about just bringing new officers in?
Well, it's going to take us, to kind of step outside the box and change our recruitment strategy a bit. What we have to do is we have to look at recruitment-rich areas where individuals are in criminal justice programs, that are in, cities where there are waiting lists. In some cities, there are waiting lists for, applicants to go on to departments. Well, those are great cities to go to because those cities already have people who've gone through a process and are simply waiting. And they will leave and go to an agency that will hire them immediately. So we're being more strategic about where we go and where we're looking, even though we would like to just recruit here in this area. Quite frankly, sometimes it can get dried out and, it is what it is.
Right.
But the need is still there. So we have to move about to find areas where we can be assured that we have an applicant pool that is a diverse applicant pool as well. And diversity is critical in our department too. We want officers that reflect the community that they serve. So the plan is very strategic in nature. We have been working on how we can offer incentives, and we will be talking with the city manager, who has been very supportive as it relates to our recruitment initiatives. And we're hoping that we're going to have a successful recruitment year and start another class in February.
Okay. Given the current climate, it's no secret that there's a contingent of people who think that the police are the problem.
Yes.
How do you deal with that sort of belief, and how do you approach your staff? It must be pretty demoralizing for them to think that they don't have the support that they need in the community.
Yes, it's difficult. It's difficult for leadership, primarily because you have to find a balancing act. You have to make sure that they understand that we have to continuously self-examine our processes, our training, in various types of, programs that we have. We have to constantly evaluate ourselves to make sure that we're doing everything that we can in order for us not to have, adverse encounters, with the public. But it takes that type of introspective leadership. If the leadership doesn't feel like it's necessary, then things are happening at other levels under the radar that you may not even be aware of. It's like examining things in your home. Sometimes you discover a dust ball behind a chair, but from time to time you need to look behind the chair to know that a dust ball formed back there. So that's a crazy analogy, but we have to constantly be evaluating ourselves and be transparent about it, so that the community knows that we're doing everything that we can in order for us to serve you in the way that's honorable and with integrity and with trust. And that takes time, especially if there have been instances in the past. It's going to take time for us to develop that type of, relationship. But we have to start in-house first. And, I believe that as a law enforcement leader, it's my responsibility to start in-house first. And keep track of those types of things.
It must make you feel really good, though, to know that there are people in the community who do support the police chief and the police department. I know there was a recent vigil, and
Absolutely.
A lot of people showed up to show their appreciation.
Yes.
So I know that makes you feel good.
Well, it's sort of hurtful, Beverly, sometimes when you think in terms of, and you understand the emotion. All of us felt emotion about what's happening around the country. But at the same time, it's a little hurtful when you think in terms of individuals who had nothing to do with the incidents that, the controversial incidents that became victims themselves. So officers were hurt about that. And then you have officers that are out on the street on a regular basis that do very positive and good work in the community, but they still feel that heaviness about what has been painted across the entire industry.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I know that the community plays a huge part in helping the police department do its job. How can you encourage the community to get more involved in working hand in hand with the police department?
Well, I think it starts with me. I have taken the opportunity as often as I can to be out in the community, because I think it's just really important that they know that I'm not just sending officers, that as a leader I believe that I need to establish those relationships as well. I've been to our various PAC meetings. Some of them I've been to twice since I've been here. And in those meetings, there is an outcry in the community that they want to help.
Yeah.
And what we have decided to do is establish a database, identify where people's talents are and how they can support the police department by their volunteerism. And I think once you open the door and allow people to come in to see how we operate, even if it's through a Citizens Police Academy, or I've talked to the executive command staff recently about mobilizing the Citizens Police Academy into the churches and into the community and different venues. Go to them as opposed to just, small groups of individuals twice a year. That educational opportunity is just so important. So I think it really requires being a leader that is leading by example and pushing that philosophy to the commanders who have to be held accountable for the officers, that this is the way we will operate. We are the community. That's the message that I'm sending to them. We are the community. And when you send that message, they have no choice but to immerse themselves in various types of activities.
On the personal side, I know you're a mom, a wife, of course, a mom, and a grandmom.
I am.
How does that all influence the way you go about policing?
Well, you can't remove your personal feelings sometimes, and how things impact you, especially if you're close to your family. You have the same concerns that Miss Jones does down the street. That's just an average citizen. Well, I'm an average citizen. I have a grandmother that's 100 years old that lives alone in Atlanta still, and I'm quite concerned about her as it relates to crime and things of that nature. But I have a 17-year-old grandson who lives in Brooklyn, and 4.0, very smart young man. Moves up and down the streets by himself these days and on the trains and everything. And I'm concerned about him as an African-American young man sometimes. So I'm constantly talking to him about what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. His mother's constantly talking to him and making sure that, he stays safe and, in environments that don't encourage any kinds of negative types of encounters with the police. But it is what it is. We have to train our young people and make them prepared when they're out and about, and be real about what's out there. So it does ring home on a number of different fronts when you see the various types of incidents that go on around the country. You have to not have a heart,
Right.
if you don't feel for what you see.
And I know we're running short on time, but I do want to ask you too about any special projects that you might have in mind beyond policing.
Well, you know, I'm really looking at establishing a women's auxiliary. You know, in the police department, I think women offer a different perspective, and I think sometimes they get overlooked because we're in a male-dominated kind of environment. So I was looking at finding a way to bring together a women's auxiliary just as a support mechanism in the police department. And also a chief's advisory board of individuals in the community who could come in and sit down and have good, honest conversation, you know, kind of, you know, coffee with the chief.
The kitchen cabinet, huh?
That's right. That's right.
I would think that would be appropriate. Okay,
That's right. Absolutely. But those are the kind of things that some out of the box kind of thinking, more positive interactions with our officers as well to boost their morale. There's some things that we can do on a regular basis just to show our officers that they are important to us and that we're concerned about not just their work life but their personal life as well.
I hear you. Okay. Well, we're coming to the end of the show, but I wanted to ask you, looking ahead, where do you want to see the police department, say, 5 years from now? What is your goal?
My goal is for the Durham Police Department to be a model agency in this nation. And I believe that this city has the foundation for that. Durham is a progressive city, and I believe the department should be just as progressive as this city is, and that's what we're going to be working for.
Okay, great. Thank you so much
Thank
for joining
you.
me.
Thank
I
you
really
for the
appreciate
opportunity.
It. I know how busy you are right now.
It's been a little busy.
Oh, but welcome to Durham, and we are so happy to have you here with us.
Thank you, Beverly.
All right. Well, that does it for City Life. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and watch us on Durham Television Network and on YouTube. Plus, stay right where you are to get a sneak peek at what's to come in the next edition of Durham Magazine. I'm Beverly Thompson. Thank you for joining me to learn more about city life in Durham.
This has been a production of Durham Television Network.